to have a man who has got his hands on the wheel when it comes to the rules of the game and driving to a large degree the future of golf. He and his committee. We've got the R&A chairman of the Rules of Golf Committee, David Bonsall, in the studio with us. Far too tanned and far too healthy and far too relaxed, I must say, for a man who spends his life, David, dealing with the rules of the game. I would have thought you'd be haggard and your hair would be all over the joint. You'd be dishevelled. How can you be looking so relaxed and healthy when you deal with the sort of stuff that you deal with?
Well, very kind of you to say so, but on radio you don't see that I've got the grey hairs, which have definitely come on over the last 6 years of working on this project on the new rules. It's been a fascinating but quite hard journey at times, but we're nearly there with implementation in January next year.
So that's when it all kicks off. And did you just say 6 years you've been working on this?
Yes, we started the project in April 2012, having discussed with the USGA the idea that we might look fundamentally at revising the rules of golf, something probably that's never really happened ever. The last big rewrite was really 1984, but before that, 1952. So a lot of years have gone by without this fundamental review of what the rules are trying to do in the game and whether they're fit for purpose and fit for the modern age. What's
the launching point for the decision that now is the time for a review? Is it your own view of golf, or do you take on board and into account feedback you get from members and players from all over the world on a cumulative, regular basis?
Well, I think those of us who are involved in the game are involved both as administrators but also as players and as spectators. So all of us can see certain events over the years which have not been ideal. Frankly, situations where penalties get applied perfectly correctly under the rules, but they seem not to fit with what people feel should be the outcome. And that was happening increasingly. And I think we also recognise that the language of the rules, the way in which we express those rules, doesn't fit with the sort of words that most people use today in everyday activity. And so we've got a bit of a disconnect between a historic set of rules, which have worked incredibly well. They are comprehensive, they do work, the referees who administer them understand those rules, but not many real golfers get those rules or feel very inclined to read them. So all of that came together. It was our own feelings, but it was also feedback from others. And we just felt that now was the right time to have that kind of fundamental review, start from scratch, look at every aspect of the current rules and see whether it was right, whether it fitted together, and whether perhaps we couldn't do better.
David, I'll be the bad cop here and ask you a couple of curly ones. I promise I'll be nicer later. One of the key words that you guys have bandied about has been modernisation, mm-hmm. And yet it's taken 6 years or maybe 7 years by the time the process has run its race. And some criticise people, golf in particular, for not being able to move that fast. What do you say to that criticism?
I think when we've had a current burning issue, we've responded very quickly. Dare I say, the Lexi Thompson incident last year at the ANA Inspiration prompted us the following week during Masters Week to have meetings, frankly, every morning and evening to try and see whether this was a topic that needed to be looked at seriously. And it led to two things, all within the space of a few weeks or months. The first was a new decision, 34.310, which gave some real focus to the judgment of a player, whether they'd been reasonable in what they were judging, and whether that reasonable judgment should be upheld, even if on review you'd say maybe they didn't quite get it right. Second aspect was to set up a video review working group. We're here on radio, but obviously on television, a lot of that evidence comes and players and others call in to studios and say, oh, did you see that, guys? What do you think? Is there a penalty? And that kind of call-in from spectators did really prompt a big debate as to whether this was fair or whether players were being disadvantaged by it, and particularly the top players, the people who are being televised all the time. So were they being held to a higher standard, given a sort of rougher end of the stick, than the rest of the players who aren't on television so much? So those were two really quite difficult aspects that we grasped straight away. Now, in the context of the Rules Project, maybe I need to give you some indication of the magnitude of the effort, really.
Oh, no.
I think we could be here for a while if you did that. I don't think anybody around this table, other than you, envies the challenge that you take on. It is,
and there's a lot of pedants in the world of golf. Let's be honest.
Absolutely, there are. We all know them. Yeah.
Well, the rules have to be so comprehensive. The game is played on virtually every type of terrain across the entire globe, virtually, and with all types of climatic conditions and players of all levels of skill. And so pretty much anything can happen on a golf course. Plus, golf courses, unlike football pitches or cricket pitches, don't tend to have roads or cart paths running through the middle of the playing field. They don't have toilet blocks.
Power lines hanging over. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the game and its rules have to contemplate all these situations and provide for them. So within the current rules, there are about 250 different parts to it. And what we did was we stripped back to find out the history of each and every rules outcome and rules provision, reviewed whether we thought it was good or bad, and as part of the project team, someone would write a paper and make a personal recommendation that we then discussed.
Hensing the 6 years, maybe.
And so we spent, 3 years talking about all of these different outcomes and saying whether we liked them or we didn't like them, whether they fitted with what we were trying to do for the game, and then we began to draft.
Well, here's my good cop, because I actually think you've got a lot of rules right for what it's worth from me, which is worth absolutely nothing, I would imagine, or in the greater scheme of things. But I think the USGA and the RNA are both doing some really good things. But I've been banging on this show before, David, about how the tours sort of seem to become they're becoming increasingly powerful in the way they interpret the rules and enforce the rules. Naturally, this is going to lead to a ball discussion at some stage, but more importantly, how critical is the PGA Tour or the European Tour, the LET or the LPGA in guiding what your rules become, because that's the public face of the game. And I sometimes get the feeling that they're working down a different path to the one the RNA would recommend.
I think it's a fair point, but they are one of those constituents that are relevant to the game, but they are not the dominant force as far as we're concerned. I think we at the US RNA and with the USGA are very conscious that we are the governing bodies, but we have really valued the input and debate that we've had with the representatives from the PGA Tour, the European Tour, the LET, etc. So my committee at the RNA certainly has people from those bodies who sit in on our discussions, and they are part of those discussions. But there is, and frankly never has been, any suggestion that if they want something, they get it. We take account of the fact that actually there are 60 million golfers who are amateurs, who struggle with what they're trying to do, who love watching the skill of the professional player and the top amateurs, but they are playing the same game by the same rules and need to be given a fair crack through those rules. So a lot of what we've done in the modernization of these rules has been to take account of ordinary golfers, not at all driven by only how the game looks on television or how the professionals want to see things happen. And some instances of that perhaps are the expansion of penalty areas, so more lateral relief for parts of the course that are pretty difficult, the introduction potentially of an alternative local rule for stroke and distance when it's difficult for people to go back and they haven't played a provisional ball, but instead of stroke and distance, they can drop a ball near where they think they've lost it. That's something for committees to think quite hard about how they use that power and whether it's appropriate to introduce that alternative throughout the course or only for certain types of events, only on certain holes. Another example is the ability to get out of a bunker, unplayable ball in a bunker, get out of the bunker for 2 penalty strokes. There are a lot of people who find bunkers difficult. We've made it a rule of golf. So you could see a guy leading the Open Championship, hits his second shot into the rolled hole bunker at St Andrews and drops out for 2 penalty strokes, plays onto the green and wins the Open. I doubt that's going to happen. Most professionals would back themselves to get out, even from the road hole bunker. But that was very much with ordinary golfers in mind. A lot of people struggle with those situations, and we're trying to help them through the rules, keep them playing within the rules of the game, not feeling as if they're playing something different.
The lost ball out of bounds ruling, I think, for me the most. That's one that I love the most, and I'm a bit with Hazy. I think they're all, really good for golf. It goes to something that we talk a lot about, David, and that's pace of play.
Yeah,
and making the game easier for people. Now, you talked about the bunker ruling. How often was that part of the conversation about arriving at an ultimate decision? We need to keep play moving, and we need to make the game a little easier for players to play.
And more understandable, too.
Yeah.
I think that people haven't always had sympathy for the rules because they've suffered with a penalty, and they haven't understood why the penalty exists. So one aspect is to clarify the purpose of certain of the rules. We've made that in purpose statements, as it were, at the beginning of each rule, so people get a feel for why this rule exists, and therefore, if you don't abide by it, why there happens to be a penalty. That aspect is certainly there in the new rules. But as to pace of play, it was very much at the forefront of our minds when we were debating potential outcomes and where you might go. If there was an outcome that we thought would improve pace of play, we tended to prefer that outcome. Importantly, we put into the rules for the first time real recommendations about pace of play. The strong recommendation that every shot should be played within 40 seconds. That would be nice to see on the tours, wouldn't it?
Yes.
But for most people, 40 seconds is a long time. I fear that quite a lot of professionals get coached to have a pre-shot routine that takes about 35 seconds. Then they get distracted and they start all over again. But they're playing for their living. I understand that. But for most amateurs, it's raising the awareness of the issue, making them aware that your own pace of play makes a difference not only to the people you're playing with, but absolutely to the people who are behind you on the golf course and wanting to enjoy it, have fun, but get in the bar and have a chat afterwards.
Are these rules like your little babies?
I'm afraid that having lived with them for so long, yes, that's probably true. Perhaps you can tell I have a passion for the game. And I think a lot of us involved in the game in one way or another do feel that passion. And here is a chance to make a difference, to do something that we all feel is for the good of the game and its future, and will be more welcoming. We want more people to appreciate what an amazingly good, interesting, stimulating game it is. And if the rules have in the past been somewhat off-putting because they've been felt to be complicated, overly harsh, or just too legalistic, then they're not doing their job as complementing all the other good aspects of the game. So we can only do our part up to a certain level, but we have certainly been trying to make these rules part of a framework for the game going forward.
So do you have a favourite child, or do you have more, maybe if it's easier to answer, do you have a disgraced stepchild in your
Black
previous
sheep.
life that you
Black
didn't
sheep.
like?
Not really. I think that certainly some of the penalties we've seen, things like poor Billy Horshaw at the 15th at Augusta, he chipped onto the green, he'd marked the ball, but then he put it back again and the wind blew it in the water. That seems really odd. His last shot had come to an end.
Yeah.
There was no doubt about that. And once he had marked, lifted the ball and replaced it, if the wind blows it in the water or into the hole, that's not the outcome of his last shot. He should play from where that ball was, and that's what we've done. I think taking away penalties for accidental movement on the ball on the putting green, something we did by local rule but is in the new rules, is also a very good thing.
So you're here in Australia at the moment. You're touring around the world, sort of teaching people how to implement the rules, I guess, is one way of putting it, when it comes into force in 2019. How's that been received here, and has there been some sort of localised reaction that's been different anywhere else?
Well, I think you have a very knowledgeable group of people here.
Oh, don't butter them up, Dave.
Well, they're not even in this room. But the fact is that we have now probably spent 3 days with in various places, both in Scotland, in Buenos Aires, and in Bangkok, and now here in Melbourne. We have been with over 250 experienced administrators, rules gurus, and referees. And they have definitely grilled us hard on how these new rules work, how they fit together, and we've helped them to gain, I hope, a better understanding of both the thinking behind them as well as the words and what they actually say. And you're right, this is designed to help them teach other people about the rules, part of the implementation that will gather pace, as it were, in the last quarter of the year. Remember, there's still a lot of golf to be played in 2018, and that's being played under the current rules. So we don't want to confuse people too much. But the experts are the people that we've been teaching, as it were, for the last these last couple of months, and that will help them run their own teaching programs later in the year and into next year.
So you're trying to tell me that Simon Magdulski and Andrew Langford-Jones are hip and modern?
Well,
because I'm going to have to take exception
that's
to
a
that.
controversial remark that I wouldn't dare to respond to. But they're good guys, and they know their stuff, and they really have a desire to do their part in making golf an attractive game to follow and be part of. And we've had such interesting feedback, debate, toing and froing with people late at night and early in the morning on golf buggies, on golf courses and around the game, trying to get those feelings and understand what people's pet hates and likes are. But at the end of it, I think these new rules seem to be standing up well to that scrutiny. Now, of course, it's really from 1 Jan that you know whether we've got it right. You're playing competitive golf in the highest level and the ordinary club level, and seeing whether the feedback is, yeah, these work, or you still got some thinking to do, guys.
And part of it all, I reckon, David, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to take some of the intimidation factor out of golf. It can be, for people who haven't grown up in the game, we're trying to bring new people into the sport. It can be an intimidating game. I don't know the rules. There's too many rules. And that will be a blockage for some people coming into the game of golf, particularly around female participation. Before we started the chat on air, we're having a chat about that being a priority of yours and the R&A's to make the game an easier game to attract girls and women into. Is that, again, somewhere layered into the conversation about making the rules a little easier to understand and a little more user-friendly?
Absolutely, and I think it's not just women and girls, but young people generally who absorb their information in totally different ways than an old guy like me would. But the fact is that we have prepared, and not yet published, but we will in September or so, a thing called the Players Edition. So it's an abridged version of the full rules of golf.
Oh, that'd be brilliant.
It is a rule book. It will apply, but it's got far fewer words in it than the full rules. And importantly, it's got a lot of diagrams and charts to help you with easy application on the golf course itself. Now, this is going to be available in book form, of course, but it will be part of an app, digital versions, and this will help people so much more. Not everybody has a rule book in their golf bag, and I don't want to ask you to raise hands as to whether you do or you don't.
I don't have one in mind.
Well,
I do.
there's no great surprise
it's
there.
a disgrace.
But pretty much everyone today carries a smartphone onto the golf
True
course
enough,
and
yeah.
around their lives. So that version will be interactive. You press on an icon, you can get straight through to the full rules language. You can get into our new official guide, the interpretations on the rules of golf. These aids to understanding, and indeed if you want to read it in the your room at home overnight, they'll give you a good understanding of the game. But the idea is very much to show a welcoming face, to use language that people can get, and to have diagrams to help you do the right thing on the golf course, but do it quickly.
I will have one of those in my golf bag.
You lock
I'll
that
take
in?
one of those stacks in my golf bag, I promise you.
All right.
I think that sounds to me to be a fantastic version of the rule book for people that I play golf with to find a whole lot more accessible than the traditional rule book, which does challenge a few of us.
Well, undoubtedly it does, and we've totally recognised that, and we have thought, I hope, in a far more creative fashion than
great.
perhaps you might expect from governing bodies.
So, David, it would be remiss of us, and I don't want to make this into a ball conversation, but to ask you about the ball while you're here. And it seems to me that the RNA and the USGA have been remarkably forthright in their opinions, especially in a historic context. Yet we're somehow, again, locked in this position where the USPGA Tour in particular, it seems adamantly opposed to what you're suggesting, if not instructing. How do you see this ball saga panning out? It's not a ball saga, it's an equipment saga and a distance saga. The ball just seems to be the public face of it, of course.
Well, that's right. Clearly, this has been sparked a bit by the distance review and the publication of the statistics from the last season on all 6 tours. The distance increase was significant, much more significant in the last 12 months than it had been over the previous 10 to 12 years. So that makes people pause. There are anomalies, there can be blips, maybe it is one of those. On the other hand, I think most of us would recognize that increasingly the fitness levels of players, the conditioning of golf courses, combined with superior technology, the combination of both the ball and the club designed to get the right launch angle for that player, that player's swing and skill level, has prompted this increase in distance. Now, is that good for the game as a whole? Is it or is it not? What we, I think, and the USGA are trying to do is prompt a genuine, open, and constructive debate around that whole topic. And where it will lead, we can't say. What we want is for people to enter that debate, do so without preconceptions as to whether one part of the game is attacking another part of the game, trying to deny them the merits of their skill. I don't think that's the case at all from our side. I think we want an open and constructive discussion. It'll lead where it will lead. It will take time. But for ordinary golfers, we like hitting the ball a decent distance. We don't hit it as well or as far as professionals, or certainly as straight. So if we were to rein back the ball or change the equipment and that affected every golfer, I think that would be a retrograde step. But that isn't really what we're suggesting. We're suggesting there should be a dialogue, and people will, as a result of that dialogue, evolve solutions that they think fit for the game. And whether that's universal, whether that's applied only in certain circumstances, that's not for us to say now. We just want people to sit down in a room and talk openly about it.
Without sort of breaching any confidentiality or going into an area you're uncomfortable going, but how big is the battle between organisations like the R&A and the manufacturers who have committed millions and billions of dollars into, designing the technology? Is that there's got to be a balance, I imagine, that needs to be struck before we get to an end point in this debate, and I imagine that would be a difficult end of the road to kind of find.
Yeah, I can understand that, and clearly the manufacturers have done fantastic work, which we've all enjoyed as golfers. But they've almost reached, well, perhaps they've almost reached the limits anyway. We already have, club specifications, and they push up hard against them. But and likewise with ball technology, they've pushed it as not quite as far as it can go, but certainly a long way. Now, people will still buy clubs, people will still buy golf balls, people will still hit golf balls into places they can't retrieve the ball, whether it's an expensive $5 ball or a scuffed up nasty. The fact is that golf balls and clubs will continue to be made, sold and enjoyed for years to come. They're part of this debate, of course they are. Their skills and what they can do will contribute to the solution. I have no doubt of that. But we don't know where this debate will go. We just want it to happen. And we don't want people to come into the room with a closed mind.
David, we could be here for a long time, I reckon. We'll only ever scratch the surface about the depth of the work that you and your committee do in a 15-minute chat like this, but I think we're all better for having had the 15 minutes that we've had, and we can't wait for... I'm with Hazy, and I'm sure you, Stace, and a lot of other kind of regular weekend players. I think we can't wait for Jan 1, 2019 to roll around. I do agree with Hazy. I think the changes have been really good for the game. So we'll look forward to seeing them implemented, and I'm sure we're all going to enjoy playing under the new system. So thanks so much for coming in and doing the work that you and your committee do. Appreciate your time.
Well, it's been great to be with you. Lovely to have the opportunity to share some of my thoughts and the background to these new rules. I hope and feel that they will be a good change for the game and for players worldwide. And if people enjoy their game all the more because of those rules, we'll have done a good job.
Stacey wants to actually do a doctorate on lateral hazards. So can you help her out with that?
Come again, sorry.
We'll get a breakout.
They're called penalty areas for the future.
Is that what
I'm
they're
keen
called
for
now?
the.
Penalty areas. Yeah. So we don't. There's no. That's just what they become now. One name fits all.
So
which is
we
part of
actually
the
have a
simplification.
bunker rule.
Yep.
So bunkers are bunkers; they're not hazards, and you can do certain things in a bunker, and you can't do certain things in a bunker. But what we've changed there is preserving the challenge of playing the shot from the sand. But penalty areas can include areas of sort of jungle, rock, thick rough that you don't really want people going into. And in that area, you can touch the ground, you can move loose impediments, you can have practice swings. What you can do is take lateral relief or other relief away under penalty. But if you can get in there and play it, even though there's no water now, or from Jan 19, then go right ahead and feel free.
Terrific. David Bonsall, R&A Chairman of the Rules of Golf Committee, joining us on the show. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.